Hello. Subscribe and that mosquito won't bite you. Alright, I don't... I'm just, you know, a little behind, to say the least, in terms of my reading material. Um, so I'm just gonna go with this one because it's simple, nice and easy. It's time to change the genre. Pretty straightforward. 8 out of 10. Super good. I love it. Pretty good. Um, it starts out a little basic, but it does end up being a lot better as the series progresses, and I think it ends in a very, very good place. What's the gist? This girl is a reincarnator. Well, I guess it's an isekai. Okay, she's reincarnated into a novel that she likes. The basic idea is she's like that typical like shitty stepmom kind of aunt character where she's like bullying the protagonist at the start, and then he, leaves with his uncle, and everything turns a little better later on, right? She's like the shitster, at the start that's like messing everything up, and then like, those family members that come around to like get money later in the story, Basically like the asshole relative that's just annoying. In this case, she changes her tune, and then kind of notices like this kid's also a little weird, and he ends up dragging her along with him when his uncle shows up to take him. And then, she basically steps in as like a pseudo mother to him rather than just being aunt. I'll say this: start of the series, relatively, it's straightforward. You've seen it before, but it gets like progressively better. And by like, I would say when you get to like the 40s or 50s in terms of chapters, peak. Super good. Love it. Now, I mean, the reason I gave it an 8 is just because, like, you have to judge something as a whole. You can't just say, like, oh, the start's really good, so that must mean the whole thing... The start's, like, bad, but the ending's great, so the whole thing's great. I think, like, the whole package matters, and in a lot of cases, I think the start matters more. Like, realistically, this start is what gets you and grips you into the series, so if the start sucks, what can you say about the rest of it, right? So I just, it's a little nuance, right? Like, it does get really good later on, like 9 or 10 levels of storytelling, but at the start, it's just so generic. And, like, they do spread these little elements out at the start, but they kind of take a while to really blossom. But I guess I'll just run through some concepts in the series. So it's really hard to talk about any of like the good story points because like it's spoiler territory, but you get the gist that he's above his age in terms of just like maturity, intelligence, things like that. So it's obvious that something's up with him. And you can make assumptions like, is he like her? Is there something else going on? Things like that. I'm not going to say exactly what the deal is, but it's a fun little situation where you're kind of trying to figure out what's going on. I will say her as a main character is kind of weird because she doesn't really... I feel like she's a little slow in the uptake. She takes time to like actually understand what's going on. This guy, I feel like, is... I would say he's, like, relatively cold, generic dude stereotype situation. But, I don't know, he's pretty likable overall. He's always doing what's best for the people that he, like, cares about and things like that. And it's sweet to see, and I think it's enjoyable for the most part. He is probably, like, between these three, he's probably the most generic. I would say, this, like, the kid who's, like, the true protagonist, I guess you could say, is probably the least generic. But they all have generic tendencies. It's just more so, like, a very, very well done generic story. With some fun elements later on. The best way to describe this story is basically like if you took a whole bunch of isekai tropes and then like combined them all into one, you know, solid story rather than just like throwing them in for no reason. And it ends up being like a fairly fun product. Other notable things, well, there is like a tonal shift at one point, like near the start. I would say the main focus of the story is on like this character's journey and her trying to assist him. Later on, I feel like there's a heavier focus on her. What else? Also, there are clear connections between this character and other characters throughout the story. Mainly, let's say, very highborn aristocrats. And I feel like the the outcome of that, in which we see the, you know, family relationship and dynamics between these two on a little bit of a grander scale, is bad. It's really annoying to just see her randomly be connected to particular characters without, you know, a lot of logic to it. It feel that like a lot of things feel like they're set up. Like his personality is set up, his dynamics are set up, her dynamics are set up. But when we talk about this like timeline of like, you know, background story, right? Like maybe this is where the actual story takes place. All the stuff that happened like back here is relatively, I would say it feels like it was an afterthought. So her familial relationships end up being I don't think they're surprising, but I think they're poorly done. And I think, of course, there's, you know, they were alluding to certain things with like eye color and looks and things like that, but I feel like it's a bit of a sham, if you ask me. And a little bit disappointing. I think that was like one of the few moments where I'm like, this is a little silly. Especially because they introduce like the actual connection way later than I feel like it would have been relevant. But I mean, it's not like I hate it or anything. It's just kind of like, like, is that really what I would do? No. I would say his character is probably very one note, which is also a little bit disappointing. Like, it's pretty much just, I like you. I don't know. I don't hate it. Like, he's likable. But he's not really likable for any sort of unique quality. He's likable just because of, like, you know, the 50 billion other Duke-esque characters like him. So it's like, I would say overall the story is relatively generic, but it does have... It's, like, fun generic. Like, I enjoy the, you know, ideas and concepts that they're doing in a generic way. Alright. Let's finish on the old SAE. What is the SAE? It's story, art, enjoyment. Story-wise, I won't even lie, I think this really matters. At the beginning of the story, it's like a 5 in terms of generic qualities. But I think as the story progresses, it probably goes at peak like a 9. So I think it is something to factor in. Like, you have to stick to it a little bit. Like, you can't just like expect to go in and it's incredible. I think that is like an important aspect of it. I think it's still worth reading, but it is something where it's like, art-wise, the art quality is really good, but I think the designs are, frankly speaking, bad. Like, they're so generic. Like, there's no unique looks or anything. So I don't think I can give it a high grading. I think 7 is probably what I would give it, because the quality of the art is good. But a piece of that art is also unique designs, and they're not there. Enjoyment-wise, I would say by the end, I really, really liked it, so I think like an 8 would be fair. Uh, then in terms of like overall rating, I think like between a 7 to an 8 is a pretty fair rating. It's a slow start, which I do think matters. But I think the further you get into it, the better it gets. So I personally would probably lean toward the 8 here, I imagine. I think like that would be a pretty fair rating. It's just, you have to worry about this beginning story, which is a little bit of a slog. Like the story is the one part that I would say is not consistent. Everything else is relatively consistent, but the story, it has inconsistency. But yeah, I mean, I think that's about it. I'd appreciate if you could like, comment, subscribe, maybe leave another story open to read down below. And yeah, I'll see you.